Hi, hello. Welcome to Between the Lines, where two professional career writers talk about writing and give tips and tricks of how to do those sorts of things, and also let you take a peek behind the curtain at our lives as full-time professional writers. I'm Devon Monk,
And I am Diana Farrow Francis of
and
the Farrow Francises of Oregon.
of the Pharaohs of Oregon. And we're here today to talk about first chapters. We thought we could do a deep dive about how to start them, what to put in them, some things to look for, and how we go about it. Kind of our tips and tricks when we approach a book. So, yeah, we're going to try to do a deep dive, but we don't want to make it as long as last time. I think our last one was like an hour and like 20 minutes or something. We got way in the weeds. So, we're going to try to keep it
It
concise.
wasn't weedy though. We were focused. It
That's
was
true.
just a big topic.
Well, and I think if you do, I love this stuff. I love talking craft and I
Me
love talking
too.
shop.
Me
I
too.
do. And if you get a couple writers in a room and you say, like, let's just talk shop, boy, you can go all night, right?
Yeah, we'll talk. We'll cover miles and miles of road, man. It's just something else.
Absolutely. So, okay, so let's talk about this. What's funny is before we started recording this, we were talking about, well, what should we talk about? And we started going over what we should talk about. And then we're getting into this really deep discussion about, well, yes, but if you do that, then you need to do this. And we're like, oh, just let's hit record. Let's just go in on this. So here we are. So Diana, do you want to bring up, start with a part of it and we'll just kind of dissect beginning chapters.
Well, we started talking about here a second ago about the idea that there's the stuff that comes on the page, right? That's the words that you're telling, the story you're telling that's on the page. But there's now I'm gonna pull out my literary theory stuff for a second because that's what I do. Um, One of the things you study sometimes, one approach to looking at a text when you're looking at a text in literature is to look at the manifest content, which is what on the page, which is what is on the page, and the latent content, which is not on the page, right? And people think, well, that's weird. If it's not put in there by the writer, then you shouldn't pay attention to it. But when you think about it as like you're putting together a puzzle, right? And there's one piece missing. You know exactly what that piece looks like. You know its shape. You even can kind of guess at exactly what colors and what appears on it from the context, right? Even though that's not there, you know what's there because you feel its shape. And it's the same thing with story. I think that when you're telling a story, you can't put everything in there, and your reader brings a lot to the table. And in fact, there's theories of literary theory where that say um, the story is not at all even on the page. It's not a story until the reader comes to it and makes it into one, because until it has that interaction in the reader's brain, it's not really a story. Um, so we were talking about that idea of the manifest, what's on the page and not on the page, and we were talking about what does the reader bring. And so I'm going to toss it back to you, because you were talking a lot about what does the reader bring that kind of creates that content that can't be seen, which is interesting because it's different for every reader, but readers share certain universal experiences and certain common experiences, so it helps it feel more like everybody's bringing the same thing, even though everybody brings something different to the table.
Right. And I think part of what we were talking about, what kicked off that part of the conversation, because first we were talking about like first sentences and what you should do for first sentences, which we'll get to. But then we started talking about conflict and when do you introduce it into a story? How near the beginning do you need to introduce some kind of conflict? And then we got into the weeds about what is conflict and what different kinds of conflicts you can introduce. And we'll get into that a little bit too.
And
But
well, let me raise up one of the things that kind of triggered all that, which I think is where you're going, and that is that you were saying that conflict should be within the early first couple paragraphs, should be the kind of signal to conflict that's in the whole book. And I was saying I'm not so sure about it. So that's kind of where that sort of started
right.
from.
Right. Because here's how I look at it. So when you're writing the beginning of your first chapter, what you are doing is you're giving a handshake deal to your reader. You're telling your reader what kind of a book they're going to get, what kind of characters are going to be in it, what kind of a conflict they're going to go through, and kind of the tone of it and where it's set and all these things. Like, you're doing a big, heavy lift right at the beginning to tell all those things, even if your phone rings.
It's done. I
Yeah,
turned it off.
put on mute. I put mine on mute. So when we were talking about conflict, I said the conflict should be right up there at the beginning of the book. It doesn't have to be the main conflict of the story, but there has to be some feeling that something is not going well, or there is a feeling that everything is going absolutely fine in this person's life. And that's where we're talking about how the reader will bring the expectation of, this isn't going to go, everything is fine in their life forever, right? I mean, it's the beginning of the book, there's the other shoe's going to drop. And so there is reader expectation. So like in a romance, if right at the beginning the woman's like, I'm never going to fall in love again, the reader is going to say, oh boy, this is all going to be about her falling in love, right? Or
against her will.
Yeah, against her will, right? Or if it's like, she walks in and sees this hot guy in a room, the reader's going to go, oh boy, the hot guy is going to be the romantic interest. And maybe the hot guy isn't. Maybe he's the baddie and then the next one is. But readers bring into the books expectations, and you are signaling to them at the beginning of the book if this is the kind of book that is going to hit those expectations, right? And like you said, you can do it through tone. Like if you start off funny, everybody's going to be like, oh, this is going to be a funny book. If you start off dark, people are going to be like, oh, this is going to be a dark book, right? You are carrying that, you are giving the reader the promise, the handshake at the beginning. And it isn't necessarily, like you said, done with, hey, this is going to be a dark book, so buckle up, which would kind of be a fun way to start a book. But that's not what you actually type in there, right? You type in other things to explain that as you're going.
Yeah, and I was thinking, I was as we were sitting there, I was looking at the first pages, because I don't know that I necessarily hit those in the first paragraphs, first couple of paragraphs. It's usually in the first couple pages, but then I was realizing that I was dropping hints that the reader doesn't necessarily know what it is, right? So, for instance, like this book, right? This book starts with somebody in the middle of an action that definitely is, there's trouble involved, right? This one starts with food. Two characters sitting there eating or drinking a disgusting drink that is there for because of calories, right? And the first line is, what is this stuff, right? But, and he's talking about the drink, but as he's talking, he's brushing away this red dust, and then the dust comes up more and more, and that dust is basically the left behind evidence of one of the two major bad guys in this book. And this particular bad guy has been able to infiltrate the stronghold, and kind of, he's leaving the dust on purpose as sort of a, hey, I've been here and you don't even know I've been here. Now the reader isn't going to know that, because the characters don't know that, but there's that sense of something here is not quite right.
But what I'm going to say about beginnings, and I was, back when I was exclusively writing short stories, your beginnings have to really carry a lot of water. They have to chop wood and carry water. Like it's bonkos what beginnings
and drink the water
and drink the water,
dig for it.
Yeah, exactly. Like you've got to carry it. So one of the things that I always try to do at the beginning is you want to get as many hints and clues and things in there for the reader that they will pick up on later. So, you know, you don't ever start a story like, and now we're going to fight the bad guy because he took over my king, he did this, he did that, an entire book's worth of reasons why you're going to fight. You don't start there unless you have a whole nother book past that. But, you start with, something is out of place, or something is different, or something is exactly the same and will never change, because that's the promise that yes, it is. It's going to change because you just told me it's the same, so it's not going to be. You definitely put all of that into your beginning. I want to go back to how you said different books started. So my Ellie Beckstrom series, I sold off of the first sentence, which was something like, All I want, let's see, it was my 21st birthday or 24th birthday, and all I wanted was a good cup of coffee. I don't remember what the other one was, like something else. I don't remember what the word was. I should probably just pull out the book. Um, and for my apartment not to stink like magic every time it rained. And that basically set the world, set the person, set the kind of the idea of what kind of the grittiness and in that first sentence. And then now when I'm looking at some of my other books, how I've started them, like the house, these Death and Relaxation, the Ordinary Magic series, it starts off with a classic thing that you're not supposed to do because it's such a trope. But she's waking up because she hears her dad say her name. And why I had him say her name is because it's a first person book and I wanted her name immediately on the page so that people knew what my main character's name was. So that's a trick. But it's is her dad saying her name, and she wakes up and grabs her gun under her pillow and sits up, and she's like, I shouldn't be hearing my dad because my dad's been dead for months now. And so like we set a lot of things right there in that first sentence. You know, she's got a gun, exactly. She's sleeping alone, her dad's dead voices, you know, and on we go to the story. Now I'm writing some cozy mysteries, and I looked at how I started the first one of those. They're not out yet. So right now, that sentence, it starts with, all I have to do is pick a direction. That's literally my first sentence. But there's a lot in that sentence, right?
There is, absolutely.
Yeah. And again, it's not telling conflict, but you know there's a conflict. Why does this person have to pick a direction? What has brought them to this point in their life? This is a pivot point, right? And
but also clear that that character is having difficulty picking a direction because it's all I have to do is pick a direction. If so, then why hasn't that character picked a direction?
Exactly.
And it's why is it worth mentioning it? Because clearly it's a problem.
Right. And taking it a step further, just off of that beginning, the whole story is about this character trying to figure out where she belongs and where she's going to take her life. Like she goes home to her old hometown where she definitely doesn't want to be. And it's about her deciding if this is the direction she wants her life to take, if she's going to stay there in that small town, if she's going to become the person who she is there. And so literally that first line tells you that's the theme of the book, really. And so you can get a lot in a first sentence. Now, is a reader going to know that? No, but it builds subconsciously as a reader's reading that they understand this person is kind of a sail without winds. She's looking for where she should, where her harbor is. And so you can really get a lot done in a short first sentence. And let's just talk about that. First sentences are really important, and they can carry your book.
Right. Yeah, they can. Well, and in mine, the one that starts with, what is this stuff?
See, that's you're asking a question. Obviously, this person doesn't know what it is. So this is something new or maybe dangerous or maybe funny. We don't know yet because next sentences will tell us, but we're already engaged. We want to know what it is too, because it was so important. It's the first thing that we hear out of the book.
Right. And then as you go along throughout the book, there is a whole lot of question of, what the heck is going on? What is happening? Who's behind it all? What is going on? And so that pushes through, even though what is this stuff isn't quite the same thing. It still is, as things happen, what is this stuff? Right. Why is it happening?
Right. And you're setting up characters who don't know what's going on in their world and are going to have to go figure out what's going on in the world. Like, I know it feels subtle. It feels like I'm talking about, silk scarves or something, but like,
right. Yeah.
And as a writer, I never I don't think I've ever gotten the first line right on my first draft, first go.
Yeah. It's not.
I redo it several times until I know that's the snappy little hook that can pull people in.
What is this stuff? It occurs to me too. If you're drinking something and asking, what is this stuff? There's a whole lot of implication to that too. Do you trust the person who gave it to you? Do you trust what's in it? Or if I can picture all kinds of scene where somebody's looking and going, what is this stuff or whatever? And you don't even know if it's a drink at that point. It's not till the next thing. But what is this stuff could refer to, body parts.
Right.
Yeah. Of course I go to body parts because I'm that way.
Body parts. Drinks, body parts. So I think first lines are really important. And my trick for first lines is, and especially when I'm first trying to start a book, I will write 10 or 12 first lines. Just like, And I did for this book. I did for every book. I just open a document. I just start writing beginnings until one of them I kind of like that first line. Like, this is not the first line that I started with, but it is the first line that I finally ended up with. I think it was a paragraph into my I had written a paragraph ahead of it, and then I thought, oh, if I cut that paragraph and just start with this first line, that gets us rolling. So like, I just write 10 or so first lines as I'm my first draft, and then I'm like, oh, I like that one, and then I just go into the story off of that one, and I go back after the book is written and look at that first line again.
Right. And one of the things I teach sometimes is that, when you start a book, a lot of times you're not fully into it until you've written paragraphs or pages or even chapters. And so sometimes I look at few paragraphs down and I say, hey, look, this is where the book actually starts, or even paragraphs in, this is where things actually start. One of my a professor of mine used to say, and I've heard this a lot in various forms, is that you want to start, say a bomb goes off, right? You want to start after the bomb. The bomb going off isn't that big a deal. It's the aftermath that's the big deal. So you start with the bomb having gone off or is in the middle of going off or what have you, and then you start writing the aftermath. And I can think of the exception to that rule is the movies that are disaster movies where they show everybody in normal life, like you were saying, normal life, everything going along before the disaster hits. And then they show the disaster hitting and then the aftermath. And the real movie's about that aftermath, but also the changing in the relationships.
And they do that because screenplays are different than books, and movies are structured differently than books are structured. Right. And in a movie, you have to get your audience connected to the characters before they'll care if they get blown up or not. Like, if you just start with
unless it's a dog.
Right. So yeah, definitely movies have a different kind of shorthand that they have to get through to the audience than writers, because it's more intimate, right? Reading a book, because you're that person in the book, like you are going on their journey, so you're already connecting. Whereas in a movie, you have to decide who's the main character, who's the side character, who are we going to go through this book with? Right. Is this just the cabbage seller with his cart? Is he the main character? And that's so different kind of style. But yeah, the idea of going back and cutting down to where when you read it, what's the most exciting sentence that you read right at the beginning after you've written some of it, you're like, oh, that's probably right where it begins. Because if that's the exciting sentence for you, not the one that, like, I was just trying to set the tone of the, that it was, good weather outside and how long it had been good weather and that they liked the good weather. We don't need to know about that. We need to know about what the first exciting thing is, or evocative thing is, right?
One of my favorite openings is Ellen Kushner's Swords Point. And the first paragraph, I don't know if you've read it, but the first paragraph describes sort of this part of a town that's run down and it's been snowed on. And so it looks pristine and white. Everything's white. And then except for the gaping maws of the houses, of the windows and stuff. And so it sounds pristine and white and pretty, but it also sounds like it's hiding bad things under it. And then the second paragraph is where the real, I think the real tension and the real story really kicks in, that hook. And that hook is something to the effect of, so this is how it begins, with a single drop of ruby red blood on a snowbank in the town. And it's just that, and so it's that so it begins is very fairy tale like, but also says this is beginning with blood and violence and in the middle of peace. Like, right. There's peace, or a sort of peace, a fake peace hiding over things. And then you have this violence and you don't know where that blood came from. But as you read, you're like, where did the blood come from? Right. That's what you want to know. And so that hook is just grabs you, so because it's that a single drop of blood on the snow, and it's and they highlight that it's that ruby red against the white, and she just does a fabulous job with that, and so hook is part of that opening that you want. It's Absolutely. Not just setting up the conflict, it's that setting up that I want to know more. I need to know more. I need to read more and turn pages.
Right.
And so I guess, what for you makes a good hook?
Right. Well, I think I want to say that every genre has its own pace. I mean, you can mess with it, but like
Right.
if you're reading a epic fantasy that's a doorstopper, you're going to have probably a more leisurely lead into the story, and readers are
Sure.
okay with that. Now, I'm going to say something. I don't love leisurely leads into stories. I want to just get to it, baby. Like, let's get on it. So I love, and if you look at over the years, I think we have moved toward more more hooky, quicker openings than we used to have, like
Sure.
say even back in the 90s. I mean, I'm old enough to I remember back in the 80s or back in the 60s, wherever you read the books from that first came out, where we well, I'm going to have to say that a lot. Okay, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but I think generally people want to get that hook or that promise right up front, and then you can get into the leisurely stuff, but like you want to get that hook. So there are so many ways to hook for me, so many
Sure. Yeah,
billions
absolutely.
of ways. It's just catch my attention. Like I tell this story all the time. There's a writer I know named Ray Vukovich, and he writes short fiction. It's often absurdist and surrealistic, and he started one of his short fictions with meanwhile. And I've talked about that. It's just such a wonderful word to start
Right.
a
Yeah.
story with. I was hooked on that first word. He, like you
Right.
said, and so it begins. You were honestly, I know the blood was what hooked you, but I think I heard you say that, and so it begins set the fairy
Yeah.
tale tone, and that's what really hooked you, because it was the, oh, we're in for this kind of a story. Somebody saying, and so it begins. That sounds like a bard talking to me or something, right? Like that's kind of, it can be just those sets of words. It can be
and
something.
and with the and so it begins, that snow isn't the end of or that drop of blood isn't the end of a problem. It's not like somebody was killed and all was solved or something like that. It was like, there's a drop of blood. Where did it come from? What kind of situation? And this is the beginning of something.
Yep.
And we
So,
don't know what yet, but it's the beginning of something.
right. And again, see, there's that, we were talking about the, what did you call it? The manifest and the latent. So, like,
Uh-huh.
there's the, and a drop of blood, that's what's on the page. But what the reader's taking into it is, why? Oh no, drop of blood. This sounds exciting. Is it a sword? Do we get to deal with swords? Because I saw the title. The title said sword. And I've got to say that too. Your reader is going to take your cover information into the first chapter.
Absolutely. And the title.
And the title. So if they're going in with the cover information and your cover looks like a mystery, and then you're throwing, complete like science fiction, fantasy kind of horror at them, they'll be like, the cover says mystery, and this is something way different inside. And what will happen is a reader will have to rebuild the book in their head right there at the beginning. So you want your cover, we're talking about first chapters, but they're going to take cover information in with them. So you want your cover to say,
Right.
also give that promise of what genre they're going to be reading at least, right?
Right, because readers when they read in a genre or multiple genres, but whatever genre they come in, they know to expect certain things that are going to be, if you're coming into a murder mystery, there's going to be a murder real soon. Just going to happen. We don't know who or where or how, but there's going to be a murder really soon.
Yep.
And they're looking, so they already know that's going to happen. They're more interested in how it's going to happen, or who might be involved, or how mysterious the mystery is going to be, that sort of thing. And they're might be looking for atmosphere or something like that. Whereas in horror, they know something horrible is going to happen. So in some respects, they're looking at those first pages maybe as, this is normal. This is normal. Where's our inkling that the big bad wolf is hiding in the closet or something? Where is it going to start showing up? And so that, yeah, the reader comes in with an idea of how this tropes and I hesitate to use the word formula, but the formula, the structures,
Sure.
and even though many books carry the same sort of hero's journey or same sort of structures, the expectations that come with them are quite different for a lot of readers, depending on what they're reading.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So here's how I always think of my first sentence or my first paragraph. I need to introduce my lead character because they are my important person, and I need them if I don't have my lead character in the first chapter, it's a prologue, and I don't write prologues. So lead character, I need to tell what the world is, as like, is it in the modern world? Is it in a fantasy world? Is it in, in space? Is it in back in time? What is it? I need to, give a clue for the world. Now, again, I'm trying to do this in my first sentence or my first paragraph or my first two paragraphs. If you get much past that, and then suddenly, let's say you're 4 paragraphs in and your reader's already like, okay, I looked at the cover. This looks like a modern murder mystery. And I've read the first 3 chapters, still looks like a modern murder mystery. Okay, I'm ready. I'm pop the popcorn. Let's go. And then you throw in there that, oh, and by the way, we're in, whatever, 600 BC. The reader's going to go, what, and have to rebuild that whole book back again in their head, and that takes them out of the story, and it makes them lose trust in the writer. They lose faith in you.
Yeah, they get annoyed because they were expecting one thing and you delivered something else.
Pull the carpet out from under them. So
they feel tricked.
They feel tricked, right? And so in the very first couple of paragraphs, you have to do your main person. This is my opinion. Your main person, your world, or your time of, if it's in the modern world or the, our world, Earth, what time or city or kind of place where it is. And then you need to establish the tone, which is it going to be kind of light? Is it going to be kind of dark? Is it going to be kind of, spooky? What's it going to be? Kind of your tone. And that's done by how you're writing it. And then you need to establish in there some kind of conflict. And I'm going to just stand up here and pound on the podium. And some of that needs to be the internal conflict of the character, which is their emotional state. Now, it doesn't mean that their emotional state is going to be the conflict of the entire book, but how are they feeling at the beginning of this book? We know that emotional state is going to inform how we're going to go through the book. So if they're, frightened at the beginning of the book, okay, we got a feeling for what we're right in the action. Here we go. We're frightened. We're going to, try to, are we fighting? Are we running? What are we doing? Right. Or are they happy and they're laid back and casual? Okay, that's great. Something terrible is going to happen, I'm sure, because we're just happy and laid back. Right. Like, you want to know the emotional state of your main character. So those are the things that I always, and the conflict, I tried to reflect in the first couple paragraphs. And it's doable because you don't have to beat people over the head with it, because like I said, they're carrying a lot of expectation into the book with them. So if they look at your cover and it looks funny, okay, they already hinted that it's going to be a funny book, right? Or it looks actiony, right, yeah. It's a woman, kick-ass woman with a sword. Okay, it's going to be a kick-ass book. They're already ready for that. So you just kind of hint to them, yes, that's the kind of book you're going to get. And I've got you. And this carries through your first chapter, whatever you decide to cover in your first chapter. And by the end of that first chapter, whatever you have promised them the book is going to be is what the book needs to be, unless you're a magnificent person who can do some sort of a twist where you flip it on its head and your reader is like, yes, I'm so glad they flipped it on its head and it's not at all the book I expected. But mostly you're setting up in that first chapter that handshake deal with the reader, and you don't want to lose them. So
right. And I don't always do all of that in the first couple paragraphs. Sometimes it's in the first 2 pages. And sometimes that's because it doesn't make sense. But that's the thing. What we're talking about is what generally you kind of want to push for. And also these are ways we know that work pretty much regularly with that. If you go this route, it's going to work probably. Right. But then you have to know the rules to break the rules, right? Is the idea. And so,
and I want to say I do go back and do most of this tuning up in revision. I'm not right. So brilliant that this just flows out of my fingers every day. I mean, I will say I do try to get the character's name on the first page, even if I'm working in first person. Like, that's a goal of mine, but that's just my twitch. But these things can be made sure that they're in there once you've done revision. When you go back and you look over it and you know what the whole book is because you're at the end of the book, and you can go back and put in the little hints there at the beginning if you need to. So it isn't something that you have to do when you're drafting, but it's something you want to think about once you've drafted.
Right. And and I definitely want to add to that I wouldn't worry about it when you're drafting. I wouldn't. And here's why, because until you finish the book, you don't know what your book's about, really. So maybe you write the whole thing and you realize that beginning that you worked on and polished and got so perfect doesn't even fit the book that you wrote. Right. So I think you have to also just write, and then you have to know the rules to break the rules, right? So maybe you write the whole thing and you realize that beginning that you worked on and polished and got so perfect doesn't even fit the book that you wrote. Right. So I think you have to also just write, and then you have to know the rules to break the rules, right? So maybe you write the whole thing and you realize that beginning that you worked on and polished and got so perfect doesn't even fit the book that you wrote. see what you get to when you get to the end, and then come back to that first chapter and make sure it's everything it needs to be based on the book that you wrote. And I think
Right.
that's worthwhile. If you worry about it or stew about it too much as you're writing, I think that just is too distracting.
Yeah, you might get stuck. And I will say that there are one of the things is I want to talk about characters here real quick. Is whoever you introduce at the beginning of the book the reader is going to think that they are the most important people for the book. So you have to be careful if you're starting your book with just side characters that you're going to kill, because your reader will have already decided that they're the important people in the book. And when you kill them in the second chapter, your reader's again going to have to rebuild the book in their head and be like, well, that's not, I thought we were going the whole way with these side characters. So, it is important that whoever you first introduce at the beginning of the book, they're your important characters. If you're writing mysteries, they say to get all of your suspects, all of your detective and the sidekick and everything in the first chapter. Like they tell you to get, if you can, shove them all in there in that first chapter. So in mystery, it's really important. In romance, you want to get your main character and their sidekick, in that first chapter. Maybe into the second chapter, but the first characters that you introduce are the ones that your readers are going to impress upon and want to go through the rest of the story with. So just be conscious about that. If you're coming in with a bunch of side characters that you're never going to hear from again, your reader's going to have to do a lot of reworking in their head to build the book back out again. And, the basics is you want a character in a setting with a conflict. That's really what you can throw at the beginning of the book. I was writing that cozy fantasy, but when I was first writing it, I wasn't going to write it as a cozy fantasy. I was going to write it as a urban fantasy with mystery in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote the first 2 chapters, and then I'm like, oh, bugger, I think I actually want to write this as a cozy mystery. So I went back and I'm like, wow, the tone is so wrong for a cozy mystery. And I could use a couple of the sentences and the basic scene, which was this woman is trying to figure out where she's going with her life. But I had to rebuild it in the tone and the expectations of cozy mystery instead of the tone and the expectations of urban fantasy. They're 2 different kinds of books.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because there, there's a series of books that when I first read them, I just didn't like them. Didn't like them at all because they were epic elf fantasy written with urban fantasy style of speech and everything else. And when I first read those, it threw me out of the book so much. And then later I went back and reread them because I just love this writer. And the names of the books are like Trouble Lost, Trouble Found. And don't ask me why I cannot remember it. She also wrote the SPI files. And for some reason, I cannot remember her name right now.
Lisa.
Yeah, Lisa.
Oh, la, I can't remember. I tried reading them too back when urban fantasy was hot and I was writing urban fantasy. They came out and they were really well received. And I thought, I want to read those. And I had the same experience. I got thrown out from the clash of the 2 styles.
But as I got used to it, I was able to do that. And
Sharon.
Then Sharon, yeah, Lisa Sharon. Then Kat Crumbs. What's her name? Yeah, it's Kat Richardson.
Yeah,
I think it's Kat Richardson. Yeah. She wrote was it the Graveside, something like that.
No, and Janine Frost.
No. These were her earlier books, and
Grey
they were urban
Walker.
Grey Walker. And there was a lot of urban fantasy style in that one too. Not as much as in the other, but man, she made that work. I think it was after I read hers and then I went back to Lisa Sharon's that I was really able to sink into them. But there are habits of delivery of dialogue and the way things are approached and everything else that is kind of linked with genre. And sometimes people cross those genres very successfully and sometimes they don't. And being aware of what the expectations of your readers are is tremendously important. But at the same time, not being locked into them is also important because you can experiment and try some things. Maybe they don't work. That's what revision's for, right? That's what revision's for.
Yeah, absolutely. Or like you said, I remember when I think the first one was like Magic Lost Trouble Found. Lisa Sharon's book came
I
out, and
think that.
it was big, and people really liked it, and I got it, and I read. I feel bad because I don't know Lisa. She's, as far as I can tell, she's a good writer. Like the writing was good, but the tone clash threw me out, and I was in a point in
Mhm.
my life where I was very, very busy, overwhelmed, under deadlines, busy with family and everything. And I just didn't have the mental space to sit
So wait a
down.
minute. You're saying back then that was the way
Back
it
then, that
was,
was the way it was. Not at all like it
and
is now.
today,
Not at all like that anymore.
I
No,
was going to
but no,
say, what's
no,
changed?
you're right. Well, I think the one thing is that right now, if I were to read those books and I were curious enough to figure out why they weren't working for me or if I could make them work for me, I would sit down and kind of like puzzle piece them. I would go through and be like, well, this doesn't really work. Oh, but I think I can get this. And there's another experience that I have with that kind of thing, which is first person present tense. It drives me nuts, which is that I walk into the room and I pick up the thing and I go over here and I do this. I do not like that style, and it's very popular in fan fiction, and it's coming out a lot in YA books, and it's coming out a lot in romantasy and that kind of stuff. And I don't like it, people. Devon doesn't like it, and that's fine, because I remember when I was first writing in first person past tense, which is I walked into the room and picked up the thing and walked out. It's the
Right.
past
Yeah.
tense,
Yeah.
first person. There were a lot of writers who were about a generation above me who were saying they hated that style because it felt wrong. They liked the third person, which is she walked into the room and picked up the thing and did the thing, right? Like they like third person past. That was more familiar to them. But first person present will immediately throw me out of a book, except for when it doesn't.
Right. It
And
was funny. It
there
was
are
funny
just
that you mentioned it.
there are just a couple writers who I've started the first sentence or the first paragraph and went, no, it's first person present. I hate this. Okay, I'll read to the next paragraph. Oh, that's a good paragraph. Oh, now I'm hooked. And then I go
Right.
ahead and
Yeah.
read it, even though it is first person present. But it's a harder lift for a writer to get me into that. I have put more of those down than I've picked them up, but there are a few that I have read,
It's
even though
funny.
it's not my style.
I was teaching in graduate school, teaching creative writing classes and reading theses and various things like that. And a lot of my students wanted to write in first person present. And some of the stories that they did that with were really, really just smooth. Like I was in the story and I didn't have a problem with it. But when it wasn't done well, it really threw me out. And so the question is, what is not doing it well? And I think that to some extent is reader bias, but I also think for me there's an awkwardness about it, because when you're in first person, your character has to stay true to themselves, and yet you as a writer are trying to write down, you're trying to world build and everything else, and so you have to notice things, like you have your character notice things. So one of the uh, first person things to do is to notice themselves in a mirror or a reflection in a window, which kind of drives me nuts, to be honest. But to do
They
it
tell
in
you not to
present,
do it.
I
They
know,
tell you not
but
to do it.
and then in the present stuff, I stop and I look at myself in the mirror. It's clunky. Um, the other thing, but there's ways of doing it. I stop and look at myself in the mirror to double check that I don't have, mascara running down the side of my face, and I notice I have gray hair, or I notice I have a chin hair growing out or something, you know, that gives it voice
Right.
to what they're noticing, that makes it idiosyncratic to that character, works. So but the present tense is really hard because
Because
you
what
have to
one
have a reader that likes that.
Right. What one writer told me back in the day was it's too intimate. Like it's because,
It's
and this was her complaint. I wouldn't do any of those things. That was her complaint. So she could not become the character and go through that world because that character was doing things and thinking things that she was not wanting to do and think. And so the presentness of it made her have to be that. And it didn't give her enough room where she could let the character do that and she could just go along for the ride.
Yeah, there's an immediacy to it and a lack of distance to it between the reader and the
And I got to
character
tell you, if you've
that
got a
makes it
character,
hard.
and if you've got a character who's doing stupid stuff that you as a
Right.
reader are like, that's a stupid thing, it's hard to go along with that, right? So I think it has a lot of challenges. Now, I think a lot of I'm going to assume, this is an assumption, a lot of younger readers are more used to it because it
Right,
is so
sure, I would
common in
agree.
fan fiction. And I think they fall into it, and they might see the other, like first person past tense is kind of weird. But I think the whole conversation can go back to, if you're starting your book, know which tense you want to put your book in, and what viewpoint, because
Right,
there's, you get a
exactly.
different kind of book if you're doing first person, you get a different kind of book if you're doing third person, and you get a different kind of
And
book out of.
it's not about just changing pronouns and stuff, because it's about how they notice, and how in third person you can do it much differently than in first person, and you can bring in more um observations and stuff than you can in first person.
Right, the
And first
information feed
person
is
is
different.
very, very much focused on personal feelings, reactions, things they notice, observe. um
If
and
you're
like, if your stomach growls and you're in third person, stomach growls, she was hungry. If you're in first person, the stomach growls, but maybe you also feel a clench in your stomach, or you suddenly crave dill pickles, or it depends on where your mind goes. It's not stream of conscious, but it's closer to it.
you get more internal dialogue monologue off of first person, so you get kind of your character narrating. They let you in because you're in their head thinking these
Yeah.
things. There, you're in first person, I am, and in third person you can get that information across, but it takes more words, so, which is weird. But you have to say, so and so was thinking about blah 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 and how they went to the la la la. Like, you can put it in there, but you have to, it's kind of like tacked on instead of just immediate. um I've
Although
done
you can
both.
get that narrative distance up really close, so it's pretty much, you
Oh
don't have
yeah,
to say they thought. You can just,
yeah, the memories of
eh,
whatever went through her head, and she felt sweaty, and or she was sweaty and
or
blah blah
you
blah.
can
Yeah,
just, yeah. And
yeah,
but that distancing can work. And those distancing sometimes you need, because what if your character is a killer, or what if your character maybe isn't a killer, but is someone that gets hurt, or is involved in swordplay or something, gets cut, gets their arm chopped off, and if then you as the reader are experiencing that right along with them. Whereas with third person, you recognize they're in pain, they get treated or whatever, but you don't have to be in their head as they're suffering, or as they're doing things that you have no respect for.
right. Well,
There's
and
a lot of anti-heroes out there that have that
yeah,
happen.
and I think you can, there's as an author, now we're talking author stuff, there's a real decision in first person and third person, because first person limits you to most of your book. Everything that happens in it has to be experienced through that one person seeing that happen. Like, you can't just say, and wahaha behind them, as they didn't see the, the
Right,
thief
yeah,
in the striped
exactly.
shirt and the mask snuck off with the bag of gold. Like, you
Right.
can't do that in first person, because it's the whole book is only through their view. If you do,
And what they see,
and
and
what
where
they
they
see and don't
and they
see
have to be present at all the stuff.
at all the stuff. So anytime you want to introduce a conflict, they got to be there somehow, like anything. And you can do it lots of different ways. You can have somebody tell them about it in dialogue. Like, there are ways you can get through it, but it's a way that you have to structure your book to make first person work. Similarly, if you're working a third person narrative, you have to know how to feed information in through third person. In general, you can get more wide information into a third person book, because your character doesn't have to be in every scene to see the stuff happen. You can use another character in third person in that book, a multiple point of view if you want. So, and you can do multiple point of views in first persons, but I've had editors tell me it's very difficult for readers to hear a different voice. Once you've established a first person in this person's voice, if you add another first person voice, the reader will just almost make it the same person. So it's very
So
difficult to do two
I've
first
played with
persons.
that in my Diamond City Magic books. I have different alternating points of view, where the my main female character is first person, but the other characters that whose point of views I get are third person. But I do it. I alternate between first and third, which is kind of a no-no, but it worked. And then I personally mostly write books in the third person, because I like the freedom that comes with that. But my everyday disaster books are first person.
Right.
Um,
And I've done a variety. I've done, my urban fantasies are generally all in first person. But it's standard to that style, because it's often
right. Yeah.
originally came out of the the hard-boiled detective genre, which is, Sam Spade, I walked into the room the day, it's all narrated that way. And so urban fantasy came out of that. So that first person narration is very common to the genre. It's changed so much over the years, but that's how it
Sure,
first started
yeah.
off. So all my urban fantasies are first person, but I have written in one of my urban fantasies, spoiler alert, one of my main character dies. I know I tell people don't do this. I mean, it's maybe it doesn't last forever, but they do die. And so like I have to switch point of views because that person's dead. And so the secondary point of view I do in first person, but I have with the other character. This is that thing that really doesn't work. But I had to do a lot of really heavy lifting to make those couple of chapters in that other person's point of view really be different than my main first person's point of view. And I had to do, there's signaling all over the page for like, this is a different lead for these couple of chapters until we get this solved. And because he's only mostly dead.
I'm not dead yet. In fact, I'm feeling much better.
Right. But then in my Age of Steam books, those are done in multiple third person points of view, because I think it fits that genre a little better, which is kind of, it's steampunk, but it's also like Weird West and kind of fits that tone better. And so, yeah, I think when you write your first chapter, if I can get us back to that, you want to try it. You can try it in all the different,
Sure.
third, first, whatever, until you land on the one that is writing the way that sounds right in your head. But you want to know what your genre in general does. In general, I'm generalizing, urban fantasy writes in first person. I want to say in general, I don't know what mystery does in general. What do you think? Or
I think
first?
mystery tends to do more. I think mystery tends to do more third person.
Third. Yeah.
At least the stuff I read.
Yeah, I think that's right. That sounds right because one, this sounds weird, but it's an older genre, and I think it's been doing third forever, really. Because that was the standard style.
One of the things I've been noticing about romance and reading it lately is that it's in first person. It's definitely in alternating points of view. The main love interests, however many there are first person, usually signaled by their name under the chapter heading or whatever. And that is fairly typical, I think, of the genre. It used to be that what I like about this is they keep the points of view separate, whereas it used to be a lot of head hopping, where you'd be in one head and then another head and then back into this head and this head.
One paragraph, the next paragraph, one paragraph, the next paragraph, and that's
or
confusing.
Sometimes
one person, next person, one person, next
mashing,
person.
Right? And that bothered me a lot because if you can be in both heads, then why are you making this so?
Just merge and kiss.
Yeah, basically, why
merge your brains and kiss?
if you clearly know what's happening, then why don't you just let them go at it? So sometimes that would bother me. I much prefer this style of alternating points of view because it feels more right.
Yeah,
right?
I got to tell you, head hopping, that will throw me out of a book. If I'm reading along in somebody's head and then suddenly I'm hearing the thoughts of somebody else, what they think about what that person just said, I'm like, no, you gave me a handshake at the beginning of this book that I'm going through it with this person. You can't just randomly throw this other in the middle of a paragraph at me. Now, like you said, if the next chapter is from that person, the second person's point of view, I'm fine with that because now that promise has been made and I'm like, okay, we're going to switch in chapters. Points of views. I'm fine with that. Even if you do it in scene breaks, I'm okay with that. It's like, oh, right. Here's a new scene. Whose point of view is it going to be? Oh, so-and-so's. Okay, I'm fine with that because that promise has been set up in the book, right?
It's funny what you mentioned with the that handshake and the changing perspectives and all that. And that might have just gone right out of my head when I was thinking.
Oh no. Brain strain. Yeah, I think so. We're coming up. We're not quite on an hour yet, but so basically, one of the things that we wanted to talk about is in your first chapter. Once you've gotten through the book and you know what your book is, you want to make sure you have a hooky first line, if you can. Like sometimes you can't get a hooky first line, and I get that, but then your next paragraph better carry that weight, right? It better carry that water. So get a hooky first paragraph, which is going to set up your main character. You're going to set up something about the conflict, even if it's just the emotional state of the character or the mental state of the character. And then you're going to set up the world or the surrounding. You're going to let your reader know where they are, because you don't want them to have to rebuild the world in their head. Like, and you definitely want to do solid details. So you don't want to just say, like I read somebody's book recently where I thought they were in a diner talking, and they weren't in a diner talking. They were in a car. I'm like, whoa, wait. And then it was like 4 paragraphs down, they mentioned the car. And I'm like, whoa, wait, I just had us eating lunch at a diner, and no, we're eating lunch in the front seat of a car. I needed that right up front, because I'm like, oh, we're eating lunch and they're looking out the windows. We're in a diner. Like, I just plugged a diner in there. And I was wrong. So, like, you want to give a concrete detail right at the beginning of kind of
meaningful details,
meaningful
too.
detail,
stuff that matters, because when you're going to world build throughout the novel, but in those first paragraphs, you're trying to situate the reader so they know enough about your world to navigate it and to feel like that it's real, right?
Yep.
And if you give too much detail about things that don't matter, their attention's going to fix on that. Like, you gave that so much detail, it must be going to matter now,
and it's
or
at the
in the
beginning
future
of the book, right?
Right.
Because the beginning of the book is so much more important. All of that hits the reader as so much more important than the end of the book.
And the reader takes all that into their minds and kind of holds on to it, waiting for it to come to fruition. And so it has to be meaningful to the story detail. You can fill out more later, but if they're sitting in a diner, you don't have to describe the details of the diner unless it's important. Or you don't have to describe, honestly, if they're driving in a car eating lunch, I kind of want to know how that's going for them. Are they slobs or whatever? How's that, because that's character development.
Even if they've stopped at a wayside, or they're in a parking lot, or they're somewhere sitting in their car eating, any of that will signal sitting in a car eating. Looking out a window doesn't signal sitting in a car eating.
Exactly.
Right? So, like, you want to pick a detail, and it can just be, I moved my Coke, my cup of soda away from the gear shift, and tried to jam my elbow against the whatever on the door of the car. Like, and that's enough to say, and took a big bite of a burger. Now I know where we are.
Because if you think about it, a diner could be in a train. It could be on a ship. So it's a case of you need to situate your reader in what this world looks like for your main character and where they're at.
Right. And when we would talk about it in short fiction, when I was in critique group for 6 years, we would talk about setting the stage. Essentially, you're putting this furniture on the stage. And also, you don't want to do something called reverse information feed, which is, you don't want to start off with the idea, I'm eating the burger and it's delicious, and the fries, and I'm dipping in the ketchup, and I'm looking out the window, and talking to my friend and all this stuff, and then you start putting in, and it's we've gone through 5 paragraphs of that, and now it's like the car is ticking, the hood is ticking because the heat is coming off of the engine, and the seat is uncomfortable, I need to bump it back up and whatever. That's reverse information feed. You're giving this important information last. So now my reader's like gone through this whole time of, okay, we were eating lunch, I thought, in a diner, and now here's the information about the car, and I'm having to re-pull it forward. So I've got the wrong information in the wrong spot. So it is about those concrete details, like you said, that are evocative details. They can be little details. You don't have to do paragraphs, and then just sprinkle them in there at the beginning. Like, I literally started a book, I, Delaney Reed, and the reason why I started the book that way is because I needed everybody to know that this book is from her point of view. And so I started the book with I, Delaney Reed, and there's like something like needed a break from the God wielding the chainsaw in front of me, right? It was some sort of a beginning like that. But I started it like, I'm just going to get out of the way her name. I'm just going to put that in there, so that, because it's first person, and I needed people to know, here's who we're going to go through the story with.
Right. Yeah. Introducing name and appearance for first person point of view characters can be tricky.
Here's a trick. have them compare themselves to somebody else.
Yeah.
So like Delaney Reed has two sisters, and she's always like, Myra's curvier than me. I'm more athletic built, and she always looks so cute in the makeup and the page boy haircut. And I just pull my hair back in a ponytail and don't like to wear makeup at all. And now we've got we've described both of them because she's comparing herself to her sister.
Right. And readers will kind of fill in the image blank. Yeah. And I've done it where I give basic information, but not detailed information. Like, in my Horngate books, you realize pretty quick that Max is, got a 21-year-old body, and it's going to be a 21-year-old body until she dies. And, and and you're going to find out she eats a minimum of 10,000 calories a day, at least, if not more. And if she doesn't, she'll probably die. Things like that. And it's all a physical thing too, because if she's not eating, she's getting scrawny and thin, and people are noticing and pointing it out and stuff like that. So as it goes through, you get reinforcement too of how the appearance and how they recognize themselves. Which helps, because the reinforcement from outside viewers of the character, outside characters, helps your reader trust you that you're telling them accurate information.
Right. So like with my character Delaney Reed, she talks about how she jogs. That's what she does on her off time. She goes on jogs. And she never wears dresses. Like, I make a big point out of it. She just doesn't wear dresses. So there's one scene in there where she goes in and she actually tries on a dress, and the shop, it's like in a used or a boutique or, new to you kind of shop, like a thrift shop.
Yeah.
And the person who owns it, she's like, where have you been hiding those legs? You look great in this dress. And I'm like, that's a way to show your character through somebody else's point of view too.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because and in first person it is a little bit trickier. No getting around that. But
that's what makes it fun.
Well, and your character could have been looking down at her legs and going, they're really pale. And,
I need a tan.
I need a tan, or I need to shave. Meanwhile, somebody else is going, wow, hot legs.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So, okay. So to things that we wanted to talk about, I wrote them down briefly when we were.
I kind of did too. Yeah.
So we wanted to talk about the hook, and I think we did.
Yeah.
Right? Get something evocative in the first line. The tone, which we talked about, like hitting the tone for your book, letting your reader know what kind of book they're going to get. Is it happy, sad, lyrical, funny?
Well, and in my books, is there going to be a lot of swearing and stuff? Because in my everyday disaster books, Beck has no filter. And so, like, in Putting the Fun in Funeral, she's right up front about how many times she drops the F-bomb and everything else, and she doesn't care. And you get that right quick. And
right, and you should, because people will bounce out of books on that sometimes. So
sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We talked about the setting, using concrete details, evocative details, get the setting right up front so that your reader isn't rebuilding the whole world in their head, right? We talked about character, like you want to introduce your main character or important characters, not just random spear carrier on the left. Like, you need important
red shirts.
Yeah, red shirts. Yeah, unless you're like, hey.
Although, to be honest, in one of my books, I introduced a character as a red shirt. It wasn't in the beginning, but it was later, fully intending to kill him. And then I couldn't stand killing him because he turned out to be such a great character. So I just tortured him a lot. But my point is, again, this goes back to don't revise until you know what your book is about, because maybe you do need that character up front. Maybe they will turn into an important character. So right. Just don't revise this out before you know.
Right. But when you know, don't just use up valuable beginning space with a non-valuable character. It's valuable real estate. Okay, we said setting, world, which is a little different than setting. Like, world, setting is where your characters or whatever immediately are, but world is what time, what year, what is it? Earth? Is it a spaceship? Where are we?
Is there magic? Are there? You can start establishing.
Are there monsters? Is it vampires? Like, set up the world premise. Then we said that you want to set up the promise of the book, which that also comes into the conflict and the theme. And I think those are all wrapped in together. We got into
Sure,
those
yeah.
kind of in sideways ways, but
Yeah.
basically whatever the book is going to be about. So let's go back to my book where all I needed to do is pick a direction as the first line, right? And that really is what the book is about, is this woman, that this Medusa, literally, it's a Gorgon, trying to figure out where she fits in the world and her direction to get there, and then where to go forward, right? It's all about her trying to find her direction. And so that's the promise in there. And it's also the conflict, because everything gets in the way of her trying to figure out if it's her right direction or not. So you want to get that promise, that handshake promise in there. And yeah, and for me also the character's emotional state, because I feel,
Right, I
for
think so
me
too,
every
yeah.
book builds up out of your character's emotional states. So
Yeah. And think about the details that are important to making that character, because there's a lot of details. Everybody does a character sheet, and the traditional ones have things like, where did they grow up, what did they do in high school, what was this and their parents and whatever, and all that, yes, can be important. But I think at this moment you want to focus on what's defining that character in this moment. um are they scared, or are they happy,
are
or
they
are they
angry,
angry,
pissed off,
or
you know?
or did they feel trapped in their life, or anything like that? Because I think that sets up the expectation too for readers, like they're going to be fighting against this, or running up against this the whole book. And in fact, generally that emotional status is what does change and develop.
Yeah, that emotional status is one of your conflicts that you're running through the book. Like you will be
Right.
running the, we're fighting the bad guy, or we're fleeing this land, or we're trying to hack this computer. You're going to do the actual physical action stuff. But I will posit that all really good evocative books carry an emotional
They have to.
conflict too. Look at the Murderbot books. It is as much about trying to fight the big corporate bad guy and save people as it is about Murderbot trying to figure out where they fit in the world, and if they
Right.
who they want to be in regard to humans, right? And how they want to live their life. So like that emotional state of Murderbot, honestly, I think that's the thing that hooks people right away, is that
Sure.
Murderbot, you know, could go murder things and has before, but would rather just watch soap operas. Like that's so
Well,
great.
it's that murder bot, the name, up against the actual internal life of, and you're like, how Murderbot?
Yeah, right.
They're
And you're
not,
like,
and they're just not out randomly murdering or anything.
no. They've watched a lot of soap operas, not a lot of murdering, but they're also like, they don't want to do eye contact. They don't really like people to ask about how they're doing, how they're feeling. Like they've got a lot of emotional states that you want to see them navigate through. That's as much fun as the rest,
Yeah,
maybe for me, even more fun
of course. Yeah.
than the rest of the stuff. So that emotional state in the beginning of your book is important, because it lets your readers come on in and join this person going through this adventure, right?
Right. And it is about the person. I mean, when you why do we connect so much with other human beings? Because we're interested in their stories, and we're interested in how they feel about things, and how they managed to overcome things, and how they felt about that, and how they pulled themselves together to do it. It's not just about the what they did. He did this and this, the end. It's about, how did you deal with that when you ran into it? How did you feel when that happened? How did you overcome those feelings, or absorb those feelings, or what have you? And so that is so critical to any novel, there, that emotional journey throughout the book.
Yeah, and we want to like these people. And I know that's controversial, because people are like, well, what about anti-heroes? We like anti-heroes too. Like we want to I'm not saying fall in love, although best books, that's really what happens. Readers fall in love with the characters and just want
Sure.
more of those characters. But we want to like the character, because we're going on their journey, and we're going to I always want them to win. You set me up a good anti-hero, I want the anti-hero to win too. Like, I want to watch somebody get their yes, get their happily ever after, get their we save the world.
Right.
Like I love that stuff. That's what I love. So I want to like the person. I have put down books simply because I couldn't like the character. Like they had
Right.
something about them that just I couldn't. That's a
Or
personal
you
thing.
couldn't respect them,
Right. Right.
is another one
Yeah.
that really will
So
throw you
yeah.
out.
So, and that all comes down to the emotional connection to their emotions. It's not just their actions, but how they think and why they're making those decisions, which is, as a writer, you're going to explain that to your readers. But yeah, so in the beginning, you want to make sure that you have that promise of the emotional state of the character too. And that's kind of what we talked about when we.
Yeah, and I think one last thing, which we've kind of touched on a little bit, is that the reader expectations. You got to know your audience, and that is so hard to do in some ways. But you got to know who you're writing for, and maybe that's you. I write my first books for me, and so I have an understanding of what I want out of a first book or first chapter and of a novel. So that's what I put into it. And maybe that's all you need, but understanding your reader and what they expect and what annoys them and what makes them irritated or puts them out of a story is well worth knowing.
It is worth knowing. I think it's tricky to figure out though, because no two readers are the same. So there's kind of more like a thumbnail sketch of, like, if you're writing a romance, there better be a happily ever after. Like, that's just a tried and true rule. And if you're saying you're writing an action adventure, there better be action and adventure in it, like just those kinds of, if there's a murder mystery, there better be a murder, like, just those basics in there. And that's coming down to, like you said, knowing the rules and knowing when to break them. I would say in general, if you're writing a murder mystery, you should have a murder in there, or something that we all think is a murder and somehow isn't a murder, but is a murder, you can get around it, but it's still, you need to lean on the murdery stuff,
Right. Exactly. And I mean, there's sort of a universal thing. Don't kill the animals.
Oh yeah. Don't torture them. Don't hold them unkindly in your fist. Like, animals, you cannot mess with in fiction. Your readers will put your books down flat, and that will be it. I made that mistake in my first Ellie Beckstrom book. I had the bad guy pick up a kitten, and he's threatening to hurt the kitten. He's actually torturing somebody at the same time, and all the information, all the letters and stuff that I got from that was, oh no, is the kitten going to die? Is the kitten going to be hurt? I couldn't read past that scene. The kitten's fine. The kitten does not die. He was just being held in his fist, and he was petting him. And the other person was being tortured right there on page. Nobody asked if the tortured person was going to be okay. It was all about the kitten. And I had people ask, I won't read any further in your book. You have to tell me if the cat's okay. And I'm like, yes, the cat ends up being okay. I love animals. It's just the bad guy picked up the cat. But so you got to be really careful.
There was a scene I didn't watch the series that far, but I remember a scene in The Blacklist, the TV show, where the bad guy character does pick up the cat and he's petting him, and you don't know if he's going to hurt that cat because you just wonder all the way through. Doesn't hurt the cat, but part of me was sitting there going, "Oh, do you know if you do that, this show is over? Period.
Yeah,
destroyed."
And I'm gonna say the only time that I've seen that work is the first John Wick. Have you watched John Wick? Have you seen the first one?
It's been a while since I've seen the first one.
I mean, spoiler alert, people, but it starts off with somebody kills his dog, and it is the dog that his dead wife left for him when she passed,
motivates him,
and he loved it,
rest of the way.
But he takes on our viewer righteous anger that somebody hurt the dog, and that's basically the whole story is, somebody hurt his dog and he's out to get him, and he gets a new dog by the end. So you can see that I think that's the only story where that works, where they killed the dog, which I couldn't believe they did it. I'm like, well, not really dead, right? Because you can't do that in movies, but like really dead, and then it's revenge, and I'm like, it works.
I was scarred by Old Yeller and that was a movie we had to watch in grade school or whatever, high school, and I was scarred by that. And then Where the Red Fern Grows, also scarred by that. Don't make me watch stuff or read stuff where the animals die, because that just breaks my heart. And
yep. So don't do that in your first chapter. Definitely none of that.
Don't do it in any of your chapter.
No chapter. Yeah. Okay. Did we do it? Are we about at an hour? What do you think?
I think so. Well, we're over. So sorry, everybody, yet again.
Close to an hour though. Pretty good. Yeah. I think we covered a lot of pretty good tricks, and I would say, back to what you said early, which is don't sweat it too much. What we're talking about are things that you can look at when you do revisions, or you can look at when you're reading books. Be like, when did they first introduce the main character? And when do I know what world I'm in? And how do I know that this is a funny book? And does a cover bring the expectations into the, story? And and those expectations are met. So like we're talking about not drafting stuff. We don't want you to think, oh no, if I don't get this right, my book isn't good. We're just talking about things to look at after you have already done the writing and you can go look at your own stuff.
Or as you're thinking about how you're planning out your book, you can have these things in your mind and you can be thinking about, how am I going to open this overall story so that it feels like I started at the right time, or that it feels like I'm doing these things.
Or again, I love this sentence, so I'm going to start with that sentence because I just love that, and just pluck it out of the paragraph and plop it on as the first.
Even if it gets deleted later, even if you revise it out later and it doesn't work. I can't tell you how many times I've started a book and thought, this is it. And the next thing I know, I'm like, oh, I need a chapter or 2 or 3 before this, or this is the wrong time. I need to start later in the book. And bye-bye, all gone, or just doesn't work there. And it's annoying, but it's the nature of the job, right?
No words are wasted. Yeah. Those words got you to where you know that you needed to start the book somewhere else. Yeah. It's not a waste. And you just, it's the process. You just keep going because it's like, it's like planting seeds. Sometimes they don't come up and that's okay. You still had to plant those seeds for the next set of seeds that you put right after them to come up. So you just keep going.
And yeah, you ramp up. Sometimes you just got to ramp up into that story. And while you're ramping up, you're finding your feet and you're finding the story. And all of a sudden, boom, you've got it and you're on your way. Yeah. And so maybe you cut a bunch of stuff in the beginning because you started over here because that's where you finally, everything came together in your head. Because for me, a lot of times it doesn't come together until I'm actually making words.
Yeah. Yeah. The act of sitting down and writing I always think of it as, people have different metaphors, but I always think of it as clay. So you've got to get those chunks of clay on the wheel. You've got to pick them up and slap them on the wheel. You can't do anything until you have clay on the wheel. And once you have clay on the wheel, you can start, I'm going to turn it into a vase or a cup or a bowl or whatever. But until you actually start getting words on the page, you won't quite know what sort of a book you're working with yet.
Right. Yeah. And you won't necessarily know your voice. You won't have captured it.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that happens with volume of words.
Yep. Yes. So so just go forth and give it a shot, and
if you have any questions, leave them down below.
Yeah, please do. We are doing these and we're not sure if we are useful. Are we useful? And we would like to be. So if there's something that we could be more specific about, or if we need to be maybe less specific, maybe we're going too deep into this stuff, just let us know. And we will definitely try to meet those needs because we'd like these to be useful.
Yeah.
It's stuff that we've picked up over the years, and this is, it's not like you just, if I were brand new first starting, ever writing and I had never done anything, this feels pretty overwhelming. So this is all stuff that you can pick up a little bit at a time. This isn't something that you have to have all figured out right at the get-go.
Oh yeah. As people write, they definitely absorb so much more and come to know their own process and their own writing style a lot better.
Yeah. And I think that can stop people from writing, is thinking, well, I know when I first started writing, I was reading all the rules because I wanted to do it by the rules, how you're supposed to write. And it stopped me from doing a lot of things because I couldn't make that rule work for me and stuff. But just the act of writing will actually get you there. So even if you ignore everything that we just said, that's fine. Just keep writing. Just get those words down because that will get you there.
Ditto.
Right? Yeah. Okay. So that's it. Until next time, happy writing and reading, people.
Yep. And enjoy the weather if you got good weather, and if not, go sit by the fireplace or something.
Cozy.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye now.
Bye.